In today's episode of True Crimes Unfold, we look into the case of Angela Stoldt and see what happens when turmoil and desperation lead to devastating consequences, leaving a cautionary tale to foster compassion in our communities. Please note that events and scenarios in this video may be graphic for some viewers. Discretion is advised. Details of the videos are taken from actual case files. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're listening from and what type of cases you'd like us to cover next, and we'll make sure to add them to our list. Don't forget to subscribe to get new stories as soon as they're released. Settle in, get ready, and let's begin. Angela Stoldt's story begins like many others, a life filled with challenges, dreams, and struggles. Born on April 7th, 1972, in Bangkok, Thailand, to a military family, Angela's childhood was marked by discipline, strict routines, and longing for connection. Her parents, though loving, maintained a firm household. Angela often clashed with her older sister, Esther, and struggled to form lasting friendships. These early experiences would shape the foundation of her troubled life. When Angela was a teenager, her family relocated to Deltona, Florida, after her father retired from the army. It was here, at the tender age of 15, that Angela met a young man 3 years her senior. What began as a whirlwind romance quickly escalated into marriage. But the union was far from the fairy tale she had envisioned. Angela confided in her family that her husband was controlling and abusive, even attempting to end her life on multiple occasions. After years of suffering, she found the courage to leave, but the scars, both emotional and physical, remained. At 20, Angela remarried, hoping for a fresh start. This new chapter brought both joy and challenges. She gave birth to her first child, but her happiness was marred by a diagnosis of anxiety and depression. Compounding her struggles was a rare congenital condition. Angela had been born without a thyroid gland. This required lifelong treatment and left her body weakened and prone to debilitating fatigue. Her second marriage, like the first, ended in heartbreak, leaving Angela alone with a child to raise and no formal education to fall back on. Desperate to find stability, Angela remarried again at 25. This marriage seemed promising at first and brought her a second daughter. The family moved to Volusia County, Florida, where Angela worked tirelessly to keep their household afloat. Despite her efforts, cracks began to show. Her health deteriorated further, leading to panic attacks and stronger medications that left her emotionally volatile. To her neighbors, Angela appeared eccentric, often withdrawn and unpredictable. Still, she maintained a semblance of normalcy, participating in community activities and doting on her children. In 2006, a new chapter began when James Sheehy, a limo driver from Philadelphia, moved in across the street. James was a friendly and charismatic man with a long-term partner, Candy Medina, and 3 children. Their families quickly became close. The children played together, and Angela and James often shared meals and stories. Despite their differences, the two neighbors formed an unlikely friendship, one that would later take a dark and sinister turn. By 2012, Angela's life was once again unraveling. Her marriage had fallen apart and her husband had left for good. Financially strained and raising her children alone, Angela turned to family and friends for help. Despite their assistance, it was never enough. It was during this time that James offered her a proposition. She could become his beneficiary for his disability payments, which amounted to $1,230 a month. In return, he would give her $100 monthly to cover some of her expenses. Initially, Angela hesitated. The arrangement seemed risky and morally dubious, but James's persistence wore her down. The two opened a joint bank account, and for a time, the arrangement worked. However, cracks began to form when James overdrew the account, leading to mounting financial stress on both sides. Tensions escalated as James began pressuring Angela for more money, even suggesting she borrow from her elderly father. Angela refused, but the strain between them grew unbearable. By April 2013, their arrangement had reached a breaking point. Angela decided to cut off the check cashing advances, a decision that enraged James. What began as a troubled friendship rooted in financial desperation was now spiraling into something far darker. Angela, worn down by years of health struggles, failed relationships, and financial insecurity, found herself standing on the precipice of a decision that would change her life forever. Unbeknownst to their neighbors and friends, a storm was brewing behind the closed doors of Angela's modest Florida home. The story that would unfold in the weeks to come would shock investigators, devastate families, and leave a community grappling with the horrors lurking beneath the surface of everyday life. The morning of April 3, 2013, began like any other for Angela Stoldt and her neighbor, James Sheehy. Yet beneath the surface of their seemingly ordinary lives, tensions had been simmering for months. Angela, overwhelmed by financial stress and James's growing demands, had decided she could no longer support his reckless spending. She resolved to end their financial arrangement once and for all, a decision that would set into motion a chain of events she could never undo. That morning, Angela and her children picked James up from his overnight limo driving job. She brought him back to her home, where her children soon went to bed, leaving Angela and James alone to discuss their ongoing financial disputes. Over drinks in the kitchen, their conversation quickly turned heated. Angela revealed her decision to stop the check cashing advances, a move that infuriated James. The man, who had once been a friendly neighbor, now seemed like a ticking time bomb. Unbeknownst to James, Angela had come prepared. In a moment of desperation and fear, she had laced his drink with a powerful painkiller stolen from her father. Angela knew the drug would cause drowsiness, especially when mixed with alcohol, and she hoped it would diffuse the situation. However, things took a darker turn when James began to feel disoriented but continued to press Angela for money. Angela suggested they leave the house to talk privately, and the two drove to a local cemetery, a quiet, secluded place where they could speak without fear of interruption. Angela had always found the cemetery a comforting place to think, but that day, it would become the site of unimaginable violence. As they sat in the car, the conversation escalated into a full-blown argument. James, now fully enraged, lashed out at Angela, accusing her of betrayal and financial deceit. According to Angela, he became physically aggressive, threatening her life and the lives of her children. Fearful and cornered, Angela reached into a camping gearbox in the back seat, intending to grab a screwdriver. Instead, her hands found an ice pick, a tool that would become central to the horrific events that followed. In a sudden, panicked motion, Angela struck James in the eye with the ice pick, but he did not stop. Overcome with terror, Angela grabbed a rope and looped it around James's neck, tightening it until he stopped moving. In the deafening silence that followed, Angela was left with a horrifying reality. James was dead, and she was the one who had killed him. What happened next would haunt Angela for the rest of her life. Unsure of what to do, she briefly considered calling the police, but paranoia and fear took over. She convinced herself that no one would believe her story, that she would lose custody of her children and spend the rest of her life in prison. Instead of seeking help, Angela chose to cover up the crime. Angela wrapped James's head in plastic wrap to prevent blood from staining her car, then drove home with his lifeless body seated beside her. Once home, she parked in the garage, careful not to attract attention, and left the body in the car while she devised her next move. The gravity of what she had done began to sink in, but Angela was already committed to her decision to conceal the crime. Later that evening, Angela retrieved tools from her garage and began the gruesome task of dismembering James's body. She worked methodically, using a knife and saw to separate the remains. Her goal was to make the body unrecognizable and easy to dispose of, a chilling reflection of the lengths she was willing to go to avoid detection. Angela's first attempt at disposal was cooking the remains. She placed parts of James's body in the oven, hoping the heat would incinerate the evidence. But the smell of burning flesh was overpowering, filling the house with an unbearable stench. Realizing this plan wouldn't work, she switched to cooking some parts on the stove while placing others in trash bags. To dispose of the remains, Angela enlisted the unwitting help of her teenage children. She convinced them they were throwing away parts of a deer she had hit with her car the night before. Together, they carried the trash bags to the woods behind their house, scattering them in different locations. Meanwhile, James's family was growing increasingly concerned. His partner, Candy Medina, reported him missing after he failed to return home from his job. Candy also noted that James had sent cryptic text messages to their teenage son, claiming he owed money and needed to disappear. However, she and the rest of the family were unconvinced. They believed James would never willingly abandon them and urged the police to continue their search. As the authorities launched their investigation, Angela was already deep into her cover-up. She buried James's cell phone and driver's license in nearby parks, threw cooking pots and pans into trash bins, and discarded her car's blood-stained rug in a local lake. Every move was calculated, but cracks were beginning to show. Angela's paranoia grew, and her behavior became increasingly erratic, setting the stage for her ultimate unraveling. As James Sheehy's family pushed for answers, the Volusia County police began piecing together the puzzle of his disappearance. The case started with the basics. Missing person flyers described James as a 6-foot, 220-pound man with several distinctive tattoos, including a Metallica skull on his calf and the word gringo on his neck. Investigators focused on the last place he was seen and his known routines. But as the days stretched into weeks, James's trail seemed to have gone cold. The initial theory was that James had vanished to escape his financial troubles. Candy Medina, His longtime partner informed detectives of his mounting debts and gambling addiction. However, she firmly dismissed the idea that James would abandon his family. The cryptic text messages sent to their son from James's phone only deepened the mystery. While the texts hinted at James going into hiding, the family found them suspiciously out of character. Police expanded their efforts, canvassing the neighborhood and questioning James's co-workers. One mechanic at the limo company mentioned seeing James enter a black car around 3 a.m. On the last day, he was seen alive. However, this lead provided little clarity, and the investigators hit a wall. Every avenue seemed to lead to a dead end until they discovered that James had been in regular contact with a neighbor, Angela Stoldt. Angela's name first surfaced during a review of James's phone records, which showed frequent texts and calls between the two. Investigators visited Angela's home to inquire about her interactions with James. Initially, she was cooperative, admitting to helping him with financial matters. She claimed she hadn't seen James since April 5th, despite his family stating they had last seen him on April 2nd. Her calm demeanor and seemingly innocuous story didn't raise immediate suspicions, but detectives couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As the days went on, Angela's behavior began to draw attention. Friends and neighbors noticed she seemed unusually anxious and withdrawn. Angela, already under immense stress, started making critical mistakes. She disposed of evidence in a frantic and disorganized manner, burying James's cell phone and driver's license in parks, discarding her car's bloodied floor mat in a lake, and throwing cooking utensils into random dumpsters. Despite her efforts, these actions only served to make her look more suspicious. The turning point came on April 20th, 2013, when Angela's sister, Esther, called 911. She reported that Angela had been acting erratically and had confessed to committing a serious crime. Esther explained that Angela had visited their parents' home, crying hysterically and rambling about being under police investigation. Esther feared Angela might harm herself, prompting authorities to act swiftly. When police arrived at Angela's home, they were greeted with a scene that could only be described as macabre. The house was chaotic and cluttered, with graffiti scrawled on the walls and strange religious icons scattered about. Detectives noted the overwhelming smell of cleaning products and decay, further raising their suspicions. Angela, overwhelmed by guilt and paranoia, refused to speak with investigators. She was taken into custody for a mental health evaluation, while detectives secured a search warrant for the property. What they found would haunt them for years to come. Hidden in various locations throughout Angela's home and surrounding areas were chilling remnants of James's body. Bones and soft tissue were found in trash bags dumped in the woods behind her house. Forensic teams identified a femur, kneecap, and several other remains, but crucial parts, most notably James's head and torso, were missing. In one particularly disturbing discovery, investigators learned Angela had been periodically inserting batteries into James's buried cell phone to create the illusion that he was still alive. This calculated act of deception underscored her increasingly unhinged state of mind. DNA testing confirmed that the remains belonged to James, solidifying Angela's connection to the crime. Angela's erratic behavior also extended to her interactions with police. During interviews, She repeatedly changed her story, contradicting earlier statements and offering implausible explanations. She claimed she hadn't seen James in weeks, but later admitted to helping him with financial issues. Each lie only tightened the noose around her, leaving detectives more convinced of her involvement. Under mounting pressure, Angela finally confessed. She provided a chilling account of the events leading up to James's death, describing how she laced his drink, drove him to a cemetery, and killed him in what she claimed was self-defense. However, her confession left detectives with more questions than answers. The level of planning, including the purchase of plastic sheeting and gloves before the murder, suggested premeditation. Angela also led investigators to the locations where she had disposed of James's remains. These discoveries painted a gruesome picture of the lengths she went to in an attempt to cover her tracks. Her actions, dismembering the body, cooking the remains, and scattering them, revealed a level of calculation that belied her claims of acting out of fear. As the investigation progressed, Angela's facade continued to crumble. The woman who once appeared to be a struggling mother trying to make ends meet was now at the center of one of the most horrifying cases investigators had ever encountered. The focus shifted to ensuring justice for James and uncovering the full extent of Angela's crimes, setting the stage for an explosive trial that would captivate the nation. By the time Angela Stoldt stood trial in December 2014, the gruesome details of her crime had already sent shockwaves through her community and the nation. The prosecution built a damning case, painting Angela as a calculating murderer who preyed on James Sheehy to secure financial gain. Angela's defense, however, claimed she acted in self-defense during a moment of fear and desperation. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial, with family members, reporters, and spectators eager to hear the tales of the case. Angela entered the courtroom dressed modestly in black, her long brown hair framing her face. She appeared somber and nervous, occasionally glancing at the jury as she awaited the proceedings. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their version of events. They argued that Angela had meticulously planned the murder, citing her purchase of plastic sheeting and rubber gloves in the days leading up to James's death. They also presented evidence of how she laced James's drink with painkillers, drove him to a remote cemetery, and ultimately took his life. The chilling testimony of her sister and daughter further solidified their argument. Both women recounted Angela confessing to the crime, with her daughter revealing Angela initially lied about the smell of burning flesh, claiming it was a dead rat in the oven. The prosecutors focused heavily on Angela's attempts to cover her tracks. They detailed how she had dismembered James's body, cooked parts of it, and scattered the remains in various locations. Her calculated disposal of evidence, such as burying James's cell phone and disposing of bloody cookware, further underscored their claim that the crime was premeditated. DNA analysis confirmed that the remains recovered from the woods and trash bags belonged to James, leaving little doubt about her culpability. The defense, however, painted a very different picture of Angela. They described her as a struggling mother overwhelmed by financial pressures and a history of abusive relationships. They argued that James's threats against her and her children had pushed her into a fight-or-flight response. Angela's attorney claimed she acted in self-defense, reaching for an ice pick in a moment of panic when James became aggressive in the car. They also highlighted her long history of mental health struggles, including anxiety and depression, suggesting these conditions impaired her judgment. Angela herself took the stand to plead her case. Her voice was shaky as she recounted her version of events. She claimed that James had become enraged when she told him she was ending their financial arrangement. According to Angela, he grabbed her shoulder and threatened to kill her and her children. In the heat of the moment, she reached for what she thought was a screwdriver to defend herself, but it turned out to be the ice pick that she used to stab him. Angela's testimony was riddled with contradictions. At one point, she claimed she had no intention of killing James, but when pressed by the prosecution, she admitted to stabbing him multiple times and strangling him with a cord. She also provided conflicting accounts of how she disposed of the body, leaving the jury to question the reliability of her statements. The prosecution used Angela's inconsistencies to their advantage, pointing out the premeditated elements of the crime. They revealed that Angela had not only prepared tools for the murder, but had also devised a plan to make it appear as though James was still alive by periodically powering his buried phone. The calculated nature of these actions starkly contradicted her claims of acting in self-defense. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from a videotaped police interview in which Angela provided a chilling confession. In the footage, she described the process of dismembering James's body and even admitted to stabbing him in both eyes. When questioned during the trial about these statements, Angela claimed she couldn't remember due to nightmares and her fragile mental state. However, the prosecution argued that a detailed confession and subsequent actions painted a clear picture of intent and planning. As the trial drew to a close, both sides delivered powerful closing arguments. The defense urged the jury to see Angela as a desperate woman cornered by a threatening man. They emphasized her history of trauma and mental illness, asking for compassion and understanding. The prosecution, however, painted a portrait of greed and cruelty, describing Angela as a manipulative woman who saw James as a financial burden and acted with cold calculation to eliminate him. On December 5, 2014, after deliberating for several hours, the jury returned their verdict: guilty on all charges, including first-degree premeditated murder, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence. Angela was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 20 years for the other charges. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read. Angela remained stoic, her expression unreadable, while James's family wept openly. For them, justice had been served, but the pain of losing their loved one in such a horrific way could never be erased. The trial left a lasting impression on everyone who followed the case. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the darkness that can lurk beneath seemingly ordinary lives. For Angela, it marked the end of her freedom, while for James's family, it provided some closure, though no sentence could ever bring him back. The trial of Angela Stoldt brought a grim conclusion to one of the most shocking cases in Volusia County's history. With Angela sentenced to life in prison without parole, James Sheehy's family was left to grapple with their grief and the haunting details of his death. Though justice was served in the eyes of the law, the pain of losing James in such a brutal and senseless manner was a wound that time could never fully heal. James's partner, Candy Medina, and their children faced the monumental task of rebuilding their lives without him. Known as a loving father and charismatic figure in his community, James's absence left an unfillable void. For his children, the loss was particularly devastating. The memories of their father were now tied to a horrifying crime that captured national attention. Angela's conviction also left a lasting impression on her own family. Her children, unknowingly involved in disposing of James's remains, were spared from legal consequences. However, the psychological toll of their mother's actions was profound. The community they lived in turned from a place of support to one of scrutiny. As neighbors struggled to reconcile the image of the struggling mother they knew with the cold-blooded killer revealed in court. Beyond the families directly affected, the case sparked broader discussions about mental health, financial desperation, and the hidden dangers of seemingly ordinary lives. It highlighted the importance of vigilance and the devastating consequences of unchecked emotional and financial strain. For those who followed the case, Angela's story served as a grim reminder of how desperation and poor decisions can spiral into unimaginable tragedy. While the trial brought closure, the echoes of this horrific crime lingered, leaving a permanent scar on everyone it touched. James's memory remains a symbol of the human cost of senseless violence. The case of Angela Stoldt and James Sheehy stands as one of the most haunting examples of how desperation and hidden turmoil can lead to devastating consequences. For James's family, the pain of their loss is a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance. For Angela, her actions will forever define her legacy as a cautionary tale of unchecked desperation. This tragic story serves as a stark reminder of the need for mental health support, community awareness, and intervention. As we reflect on these events, let us honor James's memory by fostering understanding and compassion in our communities.